we're diving deep into the future of our streets, sidewalks, and the fabric of our cities with one of the most unique thinkers in the entire mobility ecosystem. When Bern Grush looks at transport, he does through the unique lenses of social good, public policy, and human harmony, combining his very special background across design, systems engineering, and behavioral economics. Bern is the co-founder and executive director of the Urban Robotics Foundation and happens to be the lead architect behind the ISO 4448 standards, essentially drafting the global rules of the road for how sidewalk delivery robots and humans will end up sharing public spaces. He also happens to be the author of the definitive seminal textbook, The End of Driving. And I wanted to talk to him today, not just about disruption, but the true limits of how far it can go, given what we know today, and whether the curb is the true barrier. Bern, thank you for coming on the show. And I want to start with really just, you made a famous prediction, this is about 5-6 years ago at this point, that autonomous vehicles, and even today, it looks like you hold by that, at best could reach 40 to 50% of all driving. And you say that's an aggressive estimate. Why do you think that is so? And what's your time horizon for that?
So, first of all, thanks for having me, Harry. And there's two parts to that question. So the time horizon, I'm looking at a time horizon on the order of 20 to 30 years is my time horizon.
One generation.
Yeah, full generation. Most people, when they talk about these things, either talk about in the next couple of years, this, what will happen in the immediate future. This is going to take longer than that, is one thing. The second part of that question is just how far can we go? At some point, and I do mean decades away, we will have almost no human drivers. We will not be able to reach a point where there's no human drivers at all, because there are specialized machines and equipment that simply aren't worth automating. But passenger movement, goods movement, and the sort of general, the 99% of movement that you see now on our roads and highways, those will all be automated at some point. But there's another component to this, is that whether they're automated or not, or whether they're owned or not. So our work is not so much about what portion will be automated, because they'll all be automated at some point. The question is whether they will be owned or not. In other words, are we moving away from a family household ownership of vehicles toward a shared fleet of various flavors?
Are you monetizing the ride, or are you monetizing the car, its vehicle itself, or are they monetizing the ride? Fair enough.
That's exactly what we say. Are you going to buy a ride, or are you going to buy a car? Right now, you buy a car is what most of us buy a car right now. Some of us buy rides. That's what will change, and that has a limitation to it, because I have to own my own car or vehicle. If I have a trade, if I'm a plumber, electrician, I need to own my own vehicle. I can't do it. And if I have children, I'm much more likely to want to own my own vehicle, because I have a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old, and I have to go. There's so many runaround things I have to do, errands I have to run for such children, and I have to take them. I have to chauffeur them everywhere, and I'm not going to put my 5-year-old in a robo-taxi. I'm just not comfortable doing that, for example. And I don't want to put my 2-year-old, I don't want to use a robo-taxi for a 2-year-old, because I have to carry a child seat, and I don't want to use the child seat that other children have been using, and so on. So all of these issues make me want to own my vehicle if I have children or a trade or that sort of thing. That's why we say in the book, The End of Driving, that there's a limit to how far ownership will.
But let me press you on that. You're talking about a lot of, because look, a car is an option for freedom, fundamentally, because it allows you to, if you want to go for a longer ride, it also allows you to go on your daily commute to a grocery store, to work, pick up your school kids. Actually, on the other hand, though, if you have the ability to source the kind of ride you want, which I know Uber does so in dense cities, you could sort of trade that optionality for the type of car that you need at that time. For a longer ride, get a bigger car, or be able to. So in a robo-taxi world, would you not think that? And by the way, there's the other element of supporting your thesis, is that the car is a status symbol. You are, to a certain extent, judged by the kind of car you own or you show up in. But so I think I wanted to noodle on that a little bit and say, look, where did this land? And do you feel that the ride versus own argument, where do you think this will land with autonomous vehicles?
I think we overemphasize the property of a vehicle being a status symbol. They are. I mean, that's true. But if you look out on the road and just sort of count most of the vehicles are 5 and 7 years old, and there's the various vehicles that aren't status symbols. So the majority of our cars aren't status symbols. They're promoted and advertised as status symbols. But when you actually see what do you own, is the one you own a status symbol. So I have purchased cars that were status symbols. I've also purchased cars that were not. And even the ones that were soon became not so much as soon as they're used a little bit and so on. So I think the status symbol aspect is real, but it's minor. It's most of us want to get somewhere. When I need to take my 4-year-old to school. I need to go to the grocery store. I need to drive to work. When I go downtown, I use either. It depends on the circumstance. I'll either use Uber or the public transportation. But when I arrive at the meeting, no one knows how I arrived there. They're looking at what I'm wearing. They're not looking at what I'm driving, because what I'm driving would either be parked or would just would. So basically, the status part is minor in the whole scheme of things.
Fair enough. Let me ask you a slightly different question. One of the things you argue about is an autonomous vehicle can drive itself a lot, but it starts running into when it's not in a ride, it will start making these choices between just continue riding around or searching for a parking spot. Cities will need to significantly change how they manage cities, and private institutions that offer parking spaces right now will have to significantly change how parking is managed. So how do you think a city needs to change, from basically this argument that you made, from parking to pick up and drop off?
Right. Well, there's several things about that, and that's really the crux of the work that I do now, is that when you use a robotaxi and it drops you off somewhere, let's just say downtown, you have the use of that robotaxi instead of your own vehicle. So if you're using that robotaxi instead of your own vehicle, then you have now denied the city or somebody a parking fee, because you would have used the parking fee before. Let's just say you were going to park on the street, and now the city has lost that revenue. After it drops you off in the morning rush hour, it doesn't have a job right now. So to your point, it has to wait somewhere or circle somewhere. It has to do something while it's waiting for its next fare, or it has to leave downtown and go out and restage itself somewhere. So there can be a lot of extra driving. The point there is that the city is now sometimes subject to the car staying downtown and just using one or the other of the parking spaces. And the reason that the city can't do anything about that right now is because cities in the U.S. are prevented from managing these vehicles at the curb according to state statute. So what that means is now the city's losing twice. It lost the revenue from what you would have paid if you came down in your car and parked, and it also lost revenue because the car that brought you there is blocking the space that I would have used if I came downtown in my car. So the cities are losing twice, not just once. And it depends on how long those cars loiter. I'm going to say we call it curb squatting. So they're loitering, they're waiting for their next task. So what cities need to do is they need to define places where vehicles can stop and be monetized. So that is and there's multiple kinds of schemes to think about how to do that. But it has to be mapped. They have to be reserved. They have to be the fleets. When a city permits a fleet, right now the states are permitting them, but when a city admits a fleet into its jurisdiction, then the city needs to say, here are all the places that you could use to stop. It's the same thing as the bus stop. You wouldn't have a bus system without bus stops. You don't have airplanes without runways. So you can't have robotic vehicles. Robots need to be orchestrated. They can't just free for all. And that's what happens now. They free for all. They do their best, and they park on bike lanes to cause accidents. They block vehicles, and so, all sorts of mishaps and problems and congestion because they're not orchestrated. There's not a space for them, and they don't have to use those spaces. So that's the biggest error that states have made is not letting cities manage the curb. for these vehicles.
That's an interesting point, and I want to, of course, that's a regulatory, looks like that's a very serious regulatory barrier that, of course, will take political action and willpower to change that. But philosophically, what you're arguing for is, and you have argued for this in your book as well, is a hierarchy of needs on a curb for the pickup and drop off situation. But so let me ask you, look, at the end of the day, you could always make an argument that, maybe a larger vehicle needs priority over a smaller vehicle, or, a parent with kids needs a priority over, a single driver. But let me ask you this philosophical question of how do you decide this hierarchy, and is it a pipe dream for any society? Because depending on the politics of that year, a hierarchy may become just another flashpoint.
Well, we already have hierarchy of parking requirements. So as an example, you can go to a city, many cities, and there'll be loading areas. And the sign will say between this hour and this hour, it's only for goods vehicles loading on. And this is used by FedEx and UPS and so on. And so that's not exactly a priority, but it's an exclusion. So this area is only for this kind of vehicle, and this area is for this. And by the way, this area is only for a bus stop, and this area is no part in those, and so on. So we already divide our curb up that way. What we talk about with the pickup and drop off work that we do is we talk about a hierarchy of, for example, if there is a pickup and drop off spot in front of a building, and that building now has a call for an ambulance because there's somebody in that building that needs attention from an EMS system, then the priority goes to that emergency vehicle. So there's a natural hierarchy, and that's actually drafted in the standard, is that emergency vehicles have priority. Also, public works might have priority, for example. So these are priority of needs from a municipal perspective, or from a safety perspective. But your question is more like, should it go to a larger or smaller vehicle, or should it go to a vehicle that has children, or should it go to a vehicle where a mother is?
Can you impose it at the citizen level?
Yeah.
Or at the vehicle level, right? What we're doing today is at the vehicle level, saying, okay, an emergency kind of vehicle, a police vehicle, a fire engine, fire truck, or a loading truck has in certain times higher priority than a private commercial vehicle.
Right. So we don't
take that with occasion now.
We don't make any difference. So the assumption is so on a pickup and drop off space, if I'm in a robo-taxi and you're in a private car, it's your car, then you can't park there, but my robo-taxi can drop me off there. If we are both robo-taxi users, there would be no priority between us as a citizen. It might be the case, and there is one case, if you were a dignitary, there's actually a vehicle classification. So President Trump's vehicle would have priority over yours.
Yeah, he's president.
Duh. I mean, so would the mayor, and so on. But that's not what you're asking about. You're asking about.
Yeah, I mean, diplomats is not. That's a very specific use case, of course. That's a
in the standard makes no distinction between, a man going shopping and a man going to work, or an older man and a younger man, or a man or a woman. So there's no distinctions from citizen to citizen in that regard. What there is that the curb is monetized. So you could say, for example, you're quite wealthy and you would like to be dropped off at the door, and so you're willing to pay the monetization fee to be dropped off at the door. I am not, and I'm not willing to pay that fee, but I am willing to walk 2 blocks, so I might be dropped off 2 blocks away. So that's a form of setting priorities, but that's set by monetization value, not by
absolutely.
I have some right or you have some right.
Let me actually ask you a side note on sidewalk robots, which are different in that they don't necessarily use the road, but they actually use the curb itself. Where traditionally, and now the competition is people who are walking, and this has traditionally been a very free space where you can run, you can do all sorts of things on the curb. But now you have these machines that. So what are your thoughts on that? And I know this is part of some of the large parts of the work that you've done.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, that's adjacent to this work. There is a hierarchy for that, but that's a hierarchy that's a machine and human hierarchy, which makes several assumptions. First of all, the assumption is that the the device, the robot, the vehicle, is behaving according to existing traffic rules. So, as an example, because it's the intersection that's most important. At the intersection, there's a series of behaviors expected of these robots, and these some of this has already been codified in over 20 U.S. states that describe that a robot is to use the same signals that a pedestrian uses. So if you're at an intersection, and what's the pedestrian behavior at that intersection? Like, looks both ways and makes sure before it crosses. Well, that's an intersection that's uncontrolled. If you have a traffic control intersection, then the robot needs to use the walk signal from a pedestrian. Not all have a walk signal, and sometimes they have a walk signal. They have to push a button. So there's rules about all those sorts of things, but the priority is always, so far, is always the human pedestrian or cyclist. But as an example, if the robot has entered the crosswalk, and legally it's entered the crosswalk on a green signal, but there's a car turning right, for example, in some states and provinces, right turn on red is possible. In that case, the vehicle must treat the robot as though it's a pedestrian. It's not saying that robot's equal to a pedestrian, but it's saying that there's road crossing rules, and the road crossing rules about robots are the same road crossing rules that are used for humans. The standard does one exception. The standard makes the exception is the robot has to stand aside until there's room for it. So in other words, if it's waiting to cross, let's say it's waiting to cross and there's 3 other pedestrians also waiting to cross, the standard says that the robot should wait for the other pedestrians to proceed before it, challenges or competes. We don't want the robot to compete with the pedestrian. But that is not a provincial or state rule. That's in the standard. That's never been mentioned in any state legislation.
Fair enough. Let me drive us back to, of course, the road itself, and I want to talk about parking. Look, parking fundamentally is a bit of a work of human judgment, right? When you're deciding where to park, there's a mathematical, call it logical calculation in your head that says, how far do I need to walk? Where is there a spot? Does my car fit in? And a variety of different things, cost of the parking spot and so on. So there's a little bit of a complicated thing going on in your head on choosing.
I understand that your use of the word
logic.
I'm
asking you if you want to automate this for a robot, you have to basically turn this human judgment that is highly subjective into a centralized, intelligent repository, maybe artificially intelligent, in fact, is artificially intelligent. But how would you codify this judgment into a governance machine implemented by a code manager, by a code manager?
Oh no, it's easier than that. I mean, it's a lot of data and it's a messy algorithm, but it's easier than you've just described. Basically, what happens is, and this won't change, it's 400 years from now, and a person, you want to go somewhere, and that somewhere has a location, and you want to go somewhere at some time, for whatever reason. I mean, there will still be meetings and shopping and entertainment 400 years from now, so you want to go to one of those things. And so you have a time and place. So you would then say, for whatever vehicle, I don't care, you own the vehicle or you don't own the vehicle, you'd say, I need to get to place X at time Y, and I need to be within a certain distance of that. And the system has a map of the places which are available for either pickup or drop off or parking or staging or waiting, whatever it is that you need to do. And the system assigns you a space within the parameters that you've asked for. Now it gets interesting. You ask to be within 20 meters of a certain point, and there is no place within 20 meters that's available to you in the time you've asked. So then we have a negotiation. So are you willing to wait an extra 7 minutes?
Right.
Or are you willing to walk an extra 100 meters? And so on. Try to imagine 400 of us want to go to the baseball game at the same time.
Exactly.
Within the same 20 minutes. But in the front door of the stadium, there's 20 spots for the 400 of us, all within the same few minutes. You appreciate what would happen there. So
that's the thing with traffic orchestration. A concert ends early. There's suddenly a road burst on. There's some pipe burst on the street, and suddenly you have to change everything.
So what we do is we distribute your arrival to you. So we've all asked for in the same short time span. we say to you, it's the same thing I just gave before. Are you willing to wait an extra 15 minutes, which you might not because you want to get your seat and you want to get your hamburger and whatever. You say, no, I can't wait. Are you willing to walk an extra distance? So you would end up, and that if you think of that example, the extra distance might not be 100 meters. It might be you have to walk 7 blocks.
Right.
I've done that. I've gone to a stadium game and I didn't want to pay the enormous fee to park at the stadium, and I walked 10 blocks because I had free parking 10 blocks away.
Exactly.
So our system distributes your request according to your preference, because you will tell our system, I got to be on time, I'll walk. And then it turns out you should just leave a little bit earlier so you can walk, for example, or you have a little bit of extra money to pay for stopping at the gate. So we handle all that with time, place, and money. That's how we distribute that space. There's always space. Unfortunately, you have to walk in some cases. Cases. You do that now. How many times have you found yourself driving around and around and around, and you finally get to your meeting 5 minutes, I had to walk 6 blocks to find,
Yeah.
That's what we do now. That's not going to change.
Absolutely. Let me bring you to another topic about, you've argued significantly for expanded V2X infrastructure, vehicle to infrastructure connectivity for traffic management, intersections, connected traffic signals, stop signs perhaps. And this will require cities, localities, states themselves, and I know they're already arguing about this, maybe even the federal government, to significantly, spend a lot more budgeting on traffic management and so on. So let me ask you this broad question. Who pays for this and what, and how do you resolve this sort of gridlock between state, federal, and city?
Right. Well, I'm going out on a limb. This is not my area of expertise, but we certainly wrote a chapter about that in the book. And I worked with somebody that's an expert in this in Germany to do this. There are many states and countries that have already started this work. First of all, the immediate answer to your first question is really, so what is the who's going to pay for this? Well, it would normally be the governing body that operates the roads. So it's usually in many countries be federal that operate the roads. In North America, it would be states or provinces that dominate most of the large roads, or municipal, which with some of the city roads. Even in a city like Toronto, where I am, there's some of the roads in our city that pass through our city are managed by the province. There's a certain series of roads managed by the province, but that pass through the city. And then there's many roads that are managed by the city itself, and so that's, they would be responsible for that. But many of these cities don't have enough funding for this, so then they would then plead for funding from the level of government above. This is going to be a very complicated problem that you're pointing out. And we don't need that to manage pickup and drop off, but we do need this to manage an increasing number of automated vehicles if we're going to optimize and maximize safety and optimize speed. I hate to be focused on optimization of speed. That's not an interest for me. I'm more interested in optimizing livability. But unfortunately, speed is always an issue, and it's not going to be set aside because you and I might not like speed. Speed is not going to be set aside, so that will be an issue, and I think we need to have V2X for that. But I want to beg off answering a lot of things about V2X because I'm not an expert there, and
But let me fair enough. Let me move to a slightly different topic and bring us back to our original hypothesis, right? I want to start getting around that thesis around mixed traffic being the norm, because you've said autonomous vehicles will probably achieve a certain penetration, but not more than 40-50%. You've titled your book "The End of Driving." So wanted to end on a very broad question. When there's so many unanswered questions and the likelihood of it not really replacing a very critical, I want to say, respectable blue-collar job of fundamentally driving. So let me ask you this broad question. Are we even doing the right thing here? Should we even care about ending driving?
So the human activity of hands on the steering wheel and feet on brakes and pedals, controlling the longitude and lateral movement of a vehicle, that should be ended. That's going to take decades to end. That's one aspect of this. It should be ended because machines will be better than us for this in almost all circumstances. And we're not there yet, by the way. The majority of driving circumstances today, humans are still better, but that's outside of our operational design domain, so we haven't tested those. So the errors that we do see, and we do see errors, is actually still inside our operational design domain, and so on. Anyway, there's the ending of the actual activity of driving, and there's the ending of using vehicles. In other words, there's the argument that we shouldn't be using cars, we should all be using bikes and public transportation. That's not going to happen. We're still going to have cars. So it's not the end of automobility. It's not the end of having cars. It's not the end of using cars. The other part of the question is it the end of owning cars? Does my family need to own a car that I have in my driveway? Do I still need a driveway with a car stuck in it? That's what the end of the book should be, the end of owning. But first of all, you can't end owning. We're not going to end owning, I don't think, ever. That's where the 50% comes from. But we will end driving. You see, there's very, very different things, whether we're ending driving or ending owning. So your great-great-great-great-grandchildren will have some form of automobility of some kind. I don't think they will own it. But they will have it, and they will have lots of it, and it better be managed because otherwise you'll have one thing I do want to say. We talk about this 50% issue. Obviously, that sounds a little bit arbitrary. We defend it by showing percentages of people that won't want to use service vehicles. They want to own their own vehicle. I gave some examples of that earlier. And you can look at those numbers, and you can see that it's somewhere between 40 and 60% of existing populations in Europe and North America really want to have their own vehicle.
Absolutely.
Right now, it's a much higher number right now, but that number will erode, but it's not going to 0 or 5%. It's going to hover around this halfway mark.
Well, that's all we have time for today, and it's a fair question to ask. Well, we may not be ending driving, but will we really end ownership? Ultimately, the evolution of urban mobility will not be decided, though, by driving itself, by the physical limits of our infrastructure, the curb, the true bottleneck of the modern city. To move forward, we have to stop the jurisdictional tug-of-war between cities and states and the federal government. The path to efficient transport requires a defined hierarchy of needs, a framework that will prioritize who gets access to our limited pickup and drop-off zones. This shift will inevitably force us to rethink a fundamental assumption of personal vehicle ownership. When curb space is strictly rationed for maximum efficiency, the friction of parking and retrieving a private vehicle could become too high. Or will it? Rather than a forced ban, the logistical reality of the curb may naturally signal the end of owning a car for the average city dweller, but still keep it for fluid shared mobility. And of course, special needs. If we can master the curb is when we can finally transform our cities from congestion points into efficient, fluid arteries for the future. And with that, Bern, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show, and everyone else. If you liked our content, please like, subscribe, and share. Bern, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been interesting.